Our world is more complex than ever as we attempt to navigate the convergence of a global pandemic, the associated economic fallout, and the acute pain of racial inequality. Welcome to Pivot, a program of the Toby Center for Jewish Peoplehood at the Osher Marin JCC. In videotaped interviews and live Zoom events, we will explore this unique moment and where we, as a people, as individuals, and as a Jewish community, go from here. We hope that Jewish wisdom will help to guide us. Today, I welcome Rabbi Michael Lezak, who serves the Center for Social Justice at Glide Memorial Church in San Francisco. Yes, a rabbi at a church. For 14 years, Michael was my rabbi at Congregation Rodef Sholom in San Rafael. And during that time, he helped me and many others come to understand our role as Jews in learning about, taking responsibility for, and working to address inequities that have been hundreds of years in the making. He brought civil rights lawyer Brian Stevenson of Just Mercy to our shul and launched a number of programs focused on criminal justice reform. For 4 years, a small group of us have continued a program that Michael started, leading a monthly session at San Quentin Prison, helping to uplift men who have found meaning in Jewish practice. So now you bake challahs and distribute them in the Tenderloin, right?
Yes, every Friday morning, about 200 loaves. We paused it during the pandemic, and the group kick-started 2 weeks ago, and we're back up and running, baking about 150, 200 loaves a week.
And can you, in a couple of sentences, tell us about your work there?
I landed without a job description 3+ years ago. Bit by bit, I've claimed some projects. I'll tell you about 3 of them now. I do broad outreach to the Jewish community. Every day school from Palo Alto to San Rafael is coming in multiple times a year. 5 or 6 synagogues are using Glide as one of their central justice addresses. We, as I said earlier, we bake about 200 challahs in the Glide kitchen. As my original funder, Stephanie Rapp, said, you got to feed the people who feed people. So we walk in Jewish Sabbath bread around, hot Jewish Sabbath bread around the building every Friday to feed folks and give them some Jewish love as part of our pre-Shabbat practice. So that is huge and powerful. The kitchen, my wife Noah's congregation, meets at Glide 1 to 2 times a month, using it as a justice laboratory and classroom. Part 2, I developed a program to train police officers and district attorneys to help make them more compassionate in their work. We call that program An Officer and a Mensch. Quarterly, we bring in groups of 25 to 40 cops and DAs from around the country to do an immersive 3-day dive into the Tenderloin. We make them come out of their uniform and stand in line as if they're a Glide client, and really to try to work on their hearts and minds. And lastly, we do an annual justice pilgrimage to Alabama to Brian Stevenson, who I'm sure we'll talk much more about. He and the Equal Justice Initiative opened up the Legacy Museum, which connects the dots from slavery to mass incarceration. Which, like Joanne, when you and I think about Marin County, it's 80 to 90% Caucasian. But when you and I would visit San Quentin, we would visit a group that would be made up of 60 to 70% men of color. Michelle Alexander, in her book, The New Jim Crow, would say that is just a continuation of slavery in Marin County today. So we go to look head on at that, connect the dots from slavery to mass incarceration, and I would say to mass poverty in my town and in yours. And then there's a memorial called the National Memorial for Peace and Justice that remembers 4,400 known African-American victims of lynching. We bring groups of about 100 people. We raise money to bring frontline Glide staff with us who came out of incarceration themselves, did not graduate high school, mainly people of color, along with members of the kitchen and Glide Church and tech and civic and healthcare leaders, to think about what would a systemic truth, justice, and reconciliation process look like in our communities, to speak courageous truth, to seek justice, and really to think about what would an American Teshuvah project look like for slavery.
We find ourselves in a global pandemic. We are looking at a situation where people who were marginalized in our society before are feeling it the worst. 25% unemployment, worse health outcomes for people of color. And then a match gets lit and another unarmed black man is murdered by police. So is there Jewish wisdom upon which you and then in turn we can draw at an unprecedented time like this?
Yeah, I think we talk in the Center for Social Justice at Glide about pointing to possibility and summoning to responsibility. I'm thinking of two texts, like one, how the Talmud talks about people on the street. The language it uses is, those are our achim. Those are literally my brothers and sisters, right? A member of the kitchen, Dr. Glenn Rosenbluth, said to us on our gathering for the UCSF Alabama alumni last week, he said, what if we just saw people? What if we actually did not walk over them when people in Marin County came out of Target and there was that person waiting at the stoplight, and instead of racing home, you pulled over to the side and went and talked to that person for a half an hour? What if we saw our brothers and sisters on the street? Number two, on Jewish wisdom, I'm thinking about how Torah speaks 36 times to remind us that we were slaves in Egypt, that this is not some distant story. This is not some story that we're reaching back. This is actually our story, and how at Pesach we say, I was a slave. Privileged Mikey Lezak, who grew up, in the Valley in LA, I have to imagine that I was a slave. And when I really remember that, then I have to use all of my might and all of my power to change systems that have kept people of color oppressed for 400 plus years on these shores.
In one of those 36 times, I think it's in Leviticus, it says, because you know the heart of the stranger, which to me takes it up another level, right?
Yeah.
Witnessing what you see in the Tenderloin on a good day, right? On a normal day when we're not in a pandemic, how do you maintain hope?
I love you. So the first 5 weeks I started working at Glide. I was commuting from my house on a hill in San Anselmo to Ellis Street. I would drive my minivan, may her memory be a blessing, right? From the house on a hill where the mountain bikers mountain biked, most of them white, right? And the deer pranced and came and looked in our window, to Ellis Street. And I would open up my door, and all I would see were people splayed out across the street. I'd never seen someone inject drugs in my entire life. I didn't know if people were alive or dead. On one of the days, I walked past a man sitting on a stool, just drooling all over himself. It was brutal. It nearly shattered me. I went to visit my rabbi at Glide, Rita Shimon. She's a recently retired executive director. And I'm like, Rita, it's like week 3 at Glide, right? I'm like, I'm not going to make it. She's like, I know, Michael, it is brutal out there. And this is pre-pandemic, pre-fires, we'll talk about that in a little. And she's like, I know. She's like, sometimes I got to leave the Tenderloin. Sometimes I got to go get a drink. And then she flipped it. And she said, how do you know you're not looking into the face of God? Right?
Oof.
So I can say this to you, Joanne, that dude, that face of God, I literally see that person 3 to 5 times a week as I walk through the streets of the Tenderloin. Okay? During the fires, when you and I were masked up and Glide was giving out thousands of masks, I walked past him on my way to my car one day, and the face of God was unmasked. And I can't say this on the podcast, but as I walked past him, he just said, F you. Right? And it felt to me like a brutal truth. And I think maybe it was the voice of God pointing its finger at me and at us, saying, we have messed the environment up. We have messed poverty and race relationship in this country. And it is the lure. It's the invitation to the work, right? So I would say I draw hope by getting close and by being in relationship with people. My most powerful moments in the midst of the pandemic are when I'm in the Tenderloin, right? When I'm in close with people who I know and who I love and who I'm getting to know, and just showing up with a Joanne Greene-like open heart to love people.
Stop. It's interesting because often liberal Democrats walk around saying, yeah, but I'm not racist. And I take objection with that, because I don't think you can grow up in this society and not have it seep into your pores.
Amen.
I've been battling and struggling with that pretty much my whole life, and in different ways, but I would never say I'm not racist, because I think it's something that we all need to unpack. How do we go about doing that, Michael?
I worked at the Museum of Tolerance in LA, the Wiesenthal Center, before I went to rabbinical school. And when you went into the Museum of Tolerance, there were 2 doors, prejudiced and unprejudiced. They were labeled. And when you tried to open the door that was marked unprejudiced, it was locked, right? You could only go through the prejudiced door. There is no one in America that is not racist. To grow up in this stew when we have not made tshuva for this terrible 400 year long American nightmare. We grew up in it. So I just think we need to bring a healthy dose of humility to this and real honesty and candor to be able to look into the mirror and think like, yeah, this is part of the story. I think to be as open and honest as possible is the work.
I'm ready. I am ready to do that work. But I know that it's important that we, first of all, like as a Jewish community and as Jews individually, many of whom, most of whom are Caucasian, how can we be better allies, if that's even the right word? Interestingly enough, and this is a little parenthetical, when you talked about brothers and sisters, I've been watching a lot of CNN lately, go figure, and Chris Cuomo keeps saying, I hate that word allies. These are our brothers and sisters. It's not like you're there and I'm here to help you. It's we're in this together. So I just wanted to call that out. But how can we behave then as brothers and sisters to Jews of color and to people of color who are not Jewish?
Yeah, I know. I would say, like I was going to say, we have to begin at home. Like I think I grew up in LA, and a lot of my time as an adult Jew thinking all Jews were white, or most of them. And I think we have falsely put that forward. So I think, firstly, like take a look at home. Look around your synagogue on Friday night, or look at your family, and think about how the tide and the color of the Jewish world is changing, right, in America. I would point you to Dr. Mark Dollinger's article, his book, and most recently an amazing article that JTA put out called "To Accurately Count Jews of Color, We Need to Radically Change Our Assumptions About Jews." Anything Dr. Dollinger is teaching, I would read all of that. And I think I would like pull the mic away from the white Jew and put it in front of Jews of color, and think about sharing power. Think about what it might mean. You know, my wife talks about, you know, legacy synagogues, about what it would be like to take the board of trustees and give power to you know, more than 51% of them who are under 40, right? To think about the future. What would it be like to like bring a lens in to think of like what would we like to aim to strive to make our boards of trustees in 20 representative, even over representative of Jews of color.
And people of color, for instance, right? It doesn't even need to be Jews necessarily.
Absolutely.
How should we be talking to our kids? You've raised 3 extraordinary daughters, which is also amazing that Zella's already graduating from high school. Like, okay, I know it, right? I know.
Flood.
I feel your pain. I feel your joy. And
amen, sister. Amen.
All of the above. What do we tell our children, and at what ages and stages do we share with them? One thing my son and daughter-in-law have said to me this week is, thank God Lisa isn't old enough to understand, because we don't know how we would explain this to her. Yeah.
I'll say a few things. In terms of the right age, we took our daughters to the opening of the museum and memorial in Alabama. Hugely powerful. They were 11, 14, and 16 at the time. Our 11-year-old, an hour into it, was saturated. And Isoke, Femi, our maven of transformative learning, took her under her wing and walked her aside. So I actually think, like through a Jewish lens, I think bar mitzvah age is an appropriate age to really start going deep. The Kitchen has started sending their high school students with the Glide and Kitchen pilgrimage to Alabama. I think that's a pivot point. I would think about how, like when I'm done with you, I'm going to Mission High School with our entire family to kneel in memory of George Floyd with a group that's been organized by high school students. Okay, so that's that. I would say, I'm sorry. So was it how do we talk to our families about it? Yes.
Yes.
Joanne.
Yes.
Okay. Look, you remember when we brought Brian Stevenson to speak? He like you, I too have a giant justice crush on him. I think he is one of the most righteous people we have. And I quoted in many sermons at Rodef Sholom, and I still to this day, I think he gives us some of the best American justice Torah of the need for proximity. If we actualize all 4 of these points in our personal lives, in our families, in our communities, I think we can courageously begin to change. You need to get proximate. Me sitting at a hill on my house in San Anselmo talking about homeless people as opposed to actually getting close and smelling that they haven't showered and getting to talk to them and knowing their story. Radically different story. It takes work. And you don't have to come to San Francisco to do that. You know where they live in Marin County. Number two, you have to tell new narratives. Okay, us versus them, Jew, Christian, white Jew versus person of color Jew, rich, poor, the canal in San Rafael versus the rest of San Rafael. Brian's like, pull the periscope up and dream new narratives. Okay. Three, he said, which is a very Jewish point, hold on to hope. Okay. If I don't believe I can turn Ellis Street, okay, if I don't believe that we can turn the Tenderloin, I might as well retire. You and I move to Boca and get a good tan. Okay. And the last one he said is we've got to do uncomfortable things. Believe me, it was not easy opening up that door of my minivan and seeing what I saw. And it is not easy walking into the Tenderloin to see what I see today. But that quantity of discomfort agitates me and propels me to work, right? If I'm comfortable and I don't come out of my house on a hill in Marin, and I think it's all Mount Tam and mountain bikes, right? Then I'm not going to get to work. Mm-hmm. And what I would say, the question really is, how are we going to use our power? Our Jewish community has more power than we ever have, right? We should use that power to stay safe, and we should use it to be morally excellent, a light into our cities and our states and our nation.
How does the Jewish world pivot right now in this COVID era? We can't get together in synagogues.
Yeah.
Money is virtually gone. Our JCC functions, many people have chosen to keep their membership going, even though they can't come, but the vast majority have not and cannot. How does the Jewish world pivot?
I'm thinking back, I think it was your 50th birthday, Joanne, I think, when you chanted Torah.
Just last year. Yeah, just last year.
It was maybe a year and a half ago. When you decided to mark that ritual, a very pivotal time in your life, and you came to me and Stacy and you said, I want to chant Torah, and I want to bring my entire community close and use that. I want to think about Jewish ritual, right? How might Jewish ritual pull us close? How might a deeper Sabbath practice, a deeper Shabbos practice, create a perfect world for you and your family on Shabbat? And turn off the news and turn off the entire outside world. I don't read the paper. My phone is off. I do not want to be in touch with the outside world because I need to recharge. More than ever, we need to recharge. I know that I'm going to see the headlines on Saturday night, right? I know. So I want to think about how getting closer to our Jewish identities, getting closer to who we have been historically, to study how our people have been through traumas much greater than this. And to think seriously about resilience. Isoke Femi, Glide's Maven for Transformative Learning, talks to me deeply about African-American resilience. She said, how are we still here? How are we still dancing and laughing and being goofy after all that has happened to us? And she has pointed to me and said, think about Jewish resilience. Look at how you people are still here after all we have been through, right? It's a very deep truth to hold on to.
How do you balance social justice work, that outward-facing work, with the internal spiritual work?
I think it's connected to what I said. I see it all as one organic whole. For me, Jewish system, I think it's universally applicable to those running with the Jews and Jew curious and not even Jewish. I use particular Jewish language and when I teach at Glide all the time that I think resonates with a lot of folks. I think a Shabbat practice is really powerful. I think this idea of recharge summons us and points us to how we might sustain ourselves through the long haul. At Glide, we talk about trauma-informed care, right? We want to think about the trauma that Glide clients have been through last night, last month, maybe 30 years ago, that caused them to have a bruise here or a track mark here, right? What kind of trauma? And we believe in, they don't use the language of teshuvah, but the capacity of people to turn their lives around. And until we address the trauma in our lives, it will continue to haunt us.
Let's explain teshuvah for a minute.
Yes. Teshuvah is a Hebrew word that I translate as to make amends. If I'm a big jerk to Joanne Greene, right now, and I come back tomorrow to Joanne, I'm like, what's up, Joanne? She's got some bad feeling, and I might not know it or not. tradition says that I have to come to Joanne Greene and apologize sincerely. Like, Joanne, I super messed up. She'd be like, get away from me. The rabbi said, I have to come back to you the next day. Joanne, look you in the eye and sincerely say, I messed up. I'm really sorry. I did not mean to hurt your feelings. The rabbi said, she shoos me away. I got to come back a third time, right? How does that notion of teshuvah apply to trauma? How does that notion to communally inflicted trauma, right? And what happens when we don't address trauma, right? It continues to haunt those who have inflicted the trauma and those who have received the trauma. And when Glide talked about this trauma-informed care, it made me think about Jewish-informed trauma, trauma-informed Judaism, right? What trauma have the Jewish people been through, right?
Depends on how far back you want to go on this.
Yeah, system, right? And how does that still haunt us? How does that still impede us from rising to our full moral excellence, right? I won't get into land of Israel and occupation right now. That can be for my next talk. But I think there's connective tissue there. It's an amazing book by Tom Segev called The Seventh Million about the impact of the Holocaust on the state of Israel to this day. Right? And I think there's connective tissue to trauma in the Black community and trauma in the Jewish community. And I would invite us to, in our Shabbos practice and maybe midweek too, to unpack it.
We've always benefited from white privilege. There's no question.
Yeah.
What can we do to begin to undo the wrongs or begin to set things on a path toward what's right? Equity.
Yeah.
How do we get there?
Yeah. Look, at Glide, we talk about social service and social justice. We feed still in the midst of the pandemic, on average, about 2,200 meals every day, right? We give out, we're giving out. And look, to push that further, Joanne, you and I know that number is going to double within 6 months, probably, because people are going to start to get evicted. And those 40 million Americans who have become unemployed in the last 6-8 weeks are going to soon be homeless, right? We've seen the lines on TV right? So the brutality of that is immeasurable, right? I think, look, we have to do social service. People are hungry, people are need shelter in short and medium term, but we have to courageously and honestly look at systems that have been radically broken, right? I remember being in LA when the police officers who beat Rodney King were let off. I remember driving out of Dodger Stadium that night. I'm sorry, Giants fans, and seeing a palm tree on fire and seeing my city erupt. I remember going to South Central LA a few weeks later with a broom and a dustpan to try to help clean. Right? Not much has changed. I mean, some things have changed there, but systemically things have not changed. What might a vision of radical change with policing look like? Right? What if we courageously thought about changing systems? I studied in Copenhagen, Denmark as an undergrad, right? I went there because I wanted to live in a social democracy. My Danish family paid 50 to 60% income tax, right? I would shudder at that, and most Americans would, but my Danish sister got paid to go to university, right? I don't want to tell you what I'm going to be paying in tuition next year. She got paid to go to university. Everyone had free health care. There were no homeless people, okay? I want to think about collective responsibility. The same, that face of God back on the street, okay? That guy is never going to be able to hold a job, right? Why are your tax dollars and mine not paying for that guy and like-minded folks, people in similar situations, to have shelter? I think that is responsibility that is incumbent upon all of us with power.
I thank you so much, not only for sharing your wisdom in this half hour, but for the work that you do, more importantly, day in and day out. It is, we in the Jewish community jokingly talk about what's good for the Jews. You are so good for the Jews, but more importantly for the world and for where we need to go.
Thank you.
If we're ever going to create Gan Eden here. Amen.
Amen. Well, I would say, Glide needs volunteers every day. Still, if you feel comfortable, I invite people in. And when we get that vaccine, I want to invite you all to come in and get close. I think to come bake bread with us and serve meals. I can think of nothing that will change you more. Thank you, Joanne.
So much.
And so much love.
Thanks so much, Michael. Rabbi Michael Lezak of the Center for Social Justice at Glide Memorial Church in San Francisco.